When we think about reflective practice, when we talk about reflective practice, the word critical comes up very often. And so what we need to do is think about the role of critical thinking within the reflective practice process. And what we need to do, therefore, is consider a number of questions in relation to critical thinking and critical reflection. What is critical reflection? We can consider, from a very fundamental point of view, what is critical thinking? And we can also then think what we do. How do we know when we are thinking critically? That's a very fundamental question. And finally, what are the characteristics of teachers who are good at critical thinking? Because these are our models for reflective practice. So, in terms of trying to understand what is critical thinking, we can break it down into a number of components. It is about the teacher analyzing, being able to analyze what is happening. It's very clearly about the teacher conceptualizing what they are experiencing. Conceptualizing moves thought from facts to schemas, understandings. Critical thinking is very much about defining and examining the process of teaching and learning. And for the teacher, there is an idea that critical thinking is about making inferences from what they're experiencing. And because there are inferences, there also needs to be the communicative aspect of critical thinking. Or in other words, there has to be listening to other people's points of view and questioning self and others. And from this communicative aspect, there has to be the cognitive understanding, the development of reasoning and therefore synthesizing, or in other words, changing practice. So there are some key aspects of critical thinking which can help the reflective practice process. The whole purpose of this, of course, of critical thinking, is to evaluate ourselves, to understand our role in events which occur to us, and how we can change or accept those. And we can look at this from a very simple point of view, that the teacher, the reflective practitioner, has a set of core beliefs which guide their actions in the classroom. And through reflection, they can decide whether these beliefs improve or support what is taking place, or indeed can actually detract, can cancel out the effectiveness of what is happening. And it's this process then which leads into some sort of change in understanding, some sort of change in position for the teacher in relation to the way they're teaching. Critical thinking then is very much about the teacher reasoning about what's happening, reasoning through the experiences that they have, the approaches, the choices they make, and the decisions involved in teaching. And therefore, there needs to be a very strong foundation in logic for the teacher, a great deal of clarity. And of course, from this perspective, therefore, emotions and feelings can actually interfere with the clarity of thinking. And we can consider a very simple diagram in relation to this perspective, where the reflective practitioner is not being critical enough and not being logical enough, where the teacher is not willing to investigate themselves, their own roles in the classroom. This can actually get in the way of critical thought. It can actually prevent critical thought from happening. And so the teacher's role here is not about dismissing reason, but really about looking honestly at themselves and perhaps having to be honest about the flaws that they have as teachers. And so it is very clearly based in black and white thinking, right and wrong thinking about what is taking place. And where the flaws are not accepted, this can actually move the teacher to a point of comfort, which is not good necessarily if bad practices are being continued, rather than accepting truth and then becoming curious about what is actually happening. The difference between truth and curiosity and comfort here is quite significant, because with comfort there can be complacency, and with complacency people can get into bad habits in the classroom. Where there is an honest reflection and a critical thinking approach to reflective practice, then there is truth, and with truth comes the opportunity for change. So critical thinking then is moving away from the emotionality of the role of teaching and becoming much more rational about it. And it's moving away from making quick decisions, and it's moving away from superficial understandings and beliefs, and it's moving away from being scared of criticism, and is actually moving towards a much more intellectual perspective in terms of the discipline of teaching, and an acceptance therefore that the teacher has a particular responsibility in terms of what is happening in the classroom.